All right, and welcome back to Better Understanding the Bible. I'm your host, Dallas, joined again by Mercy. Thank you for being here.
Hi there.
We're going to continue our conversation, moving into what is Adam in the idea of the Bible. We've been talking about Adam only and these different kind of topics, and so in this conversation, we'd like to get deeper into this. So, what we did in the last couple conversations, talking about context of Genesis, Moses in Deuteronomy, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, the four books of the Torah, wrote about the creation of the people of Israel and reaching back to Adam, where the covenant started with God, that led through a bunch of events that brought into the people of Israel the reason why God made covenant with them. So, what we're going to be doing is talking about in Genesis and the environment in which Moses was describing at the time that God made covenant with Adam, because when we read according to the things that Moses was presenting to Israel in the law, that those same things were applicable to them. We will also find that as those continue on, that even becomes applicable to Jesus. So, this is a very important topic, which is why did Moses claim Adam? What was going on at the times of Adam? Who is Adam? And everything Adam in this episode. So, thanks for checking in. We like the cans of worms, and we're going to continue in this episode. And I know Mercy has a lot to say about who Adam is and understands. I love her word. There's fractal. There's many. You take a look at at many concepts in the Bible. You look through one piece of one lens, it breaks off into a bunch of lenses, which keep breaking off, and they just can't stop understanding all these different perception angles to get this full picture. So, Mercy, I just want to say thank you again for being here and joining me in this chat, because I know not only is it cool, but you love it. So, thanks for sticking through this.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
So what we're going to do quickly is do a quick survey again of what was taking place in Genesis, because this is very important for us. Um, what's one thing that so when we take a look at Genesis 1, the idea is Moses is reaching back to a time where he said that God made a covenant with Adam, and this covenant that he made with him was passed to Israel. So we need to understand why he's saying this and what was said and why would it be passed. Obviously, there's got to be value in this passing. We hear all the time about the promises of God. There's got to be something good behind it. Like, you don't go into covenant, you don't go into agreement with anybody if you're not getting anything out of it. So we're going to take a look at the circumstances and situations surrounding this covenant to see what they're getting. Like, what's the point? And that point will actually lead us into the answer to who is Adam, what is Adam, and how that biblical concept actually frames the whole position of why even Israel got included into this covenant. So,
And
Genesis, oh, go ahead.
remind the audience that Genesis is that historical prologue in the Suzerain Vassal Treaty, right? That's why Genesis is there in a normal, natural Suzerain Vassal Treaty. You would have the whole historical prologue. So if Moses didn't do that, it wouldn't be legit. Right? I mean, you have to establish some history to give you that legitimacy, that rule and right to reign in that land as a people group with a name. And that's very important for people to know. So that's why Genesis is there. It actually fits the format of the Suzerain Vassal Treaty. That is the covenantal system that we're working on. That's what we're seeing, that the whole Bible is really based on. Like I say, it's a Rosetta Stone. And so when you're talking about that historical prologue, what I put in my mind is, oh my gosh, we have to have in that historical prologue the people, the land, and they always went by a name. And this is the definition of people or mankind or man, Adam. So it's so cool, like how the language itself fits what we're talking about today. And I think, our modern time, we are not thinking about all of these things. We're just like, oh, I'm an American, or I live in California, I'm a Texan, or all of this, but it's a combination of these things that when we open up Genesis, we have to enter into that world, and it's talking about a specific people group, right? And that has a landmass, and there's borders and boundaries, and they're going by a special name or a specific name to give them what national identity. That's really important. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and to further that, Moses goes out of his way emphatically over and over and over again, specifically if you want a direct reference in Deuteronomy 7, where he explicitly says, the reason why you're being included into this covenant, into this system to be my special people, has nothing to do with you. It's because I'm fulfilling an oath to your forefathers. Well, if we go back to the beginning of Exodus, none of these forefathers are mentioned. So if there was no Genesis, we would have no idea what he was talking about. Over and over and over again, this reference to these people, we would have no understanding that they even existed because the Bible doesn't mention them. That is what Genesis is talking about. So when God uh, made covenant with Adam, and then that covenant spanned up until Abraham and the promises to Abraham that brought that oath that was being fulfilled upon Israel into reality. So
Mm.
the Genesis, that's why again, and so thank you, Mercy, for pointing that out, just that significance of why is Moses going back to Adam? Because that's historically his claim to why they're inheriting this covenant.
Mm.
So, what is this covenant that they're inheriting? That's obviously a pretty big deal for them. He's claiming this guy had a covenant, they're inheriting that covenant. So, what is it that they're getting? So when we jumped into Genesis, now this again, I'm going to stress for everybody listening. I have gone through a few times through this channel these scriptures and these texts specifically. Go through the verse by verse playlist that I have set up through those videos and other videos with the like titles, because we're not going to get into the direct, deep specifics to this language, to this imagery, but we're going to make references because they've been fully established in those videos already. And nobody wants us to just keep repeating the same things over. So if we say things that might sound confusing or don't make sense, please check out the other videos. That's why I've gone through them, is so that now that that language is established, now we can discuss what it's saying. And that's kind of where we're at. So not to discourage you, but we're already, a little deep into this conversation. So just for everybody involved and to respect those people who've already put in the time, we're going to keep moving in that direction. So anyway, Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. The statement without form and void is a reference to without form as the destruction of the land. Void is no inhabitants. So destruction, the cities are laid waste. There's destruction upon the crops have been destroyed. There's no suitable, like Mercy was saying, when a people was created, they have land, they gotta have borders. Well, here those borders are unformed. They haven't been built up. They're torn down. So they're unformed and unfilled. There's no population in it. So the land, it was the earth was unformed and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. The deep is a reference to flood water. Go ahead, Mercy.
And when we're talking about that empty and void or formless and void, depending on which translation you're reading in the Bible, that word, we're thinking, well, it's in the beginning. So it's in the beginning of time. It's in the beginning of a physical world that's being created. No, it's talking about in the beginning. You know the context when you're looking at that word, and how in Jeremiah 4:23, he's using the same word. That emptiness doesn't mean there was nothing there, but that something was destroyed. And the very word that defines that, I'm going to write a post on this, is absolutely desolation. Desolation absolutely means in our language empty, not because there was nothing there, but there was something there and it got destroyed. And they would call that empty, formless, void. So I think that's really important to know. I know when I started to study this with you, Dallas, and saw that, it totally blew my mind away. And that is like really the setting that we're going into. We're not going into an original like creation account, but it's a recreation that we're entering into. Something was already there. We don't know, whatever, but now here's a recreation.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use the term recreation because that assumes that there was a creation beforehand. We don't know if there was another people on the earth before Adam that this was done with. So we might
Mm,
be taking liberties by saying recreation. But what we can definitely say was there was a creation.
yes, there was definitely life and people prior to.
And so then this creation is separating itself from that. And when we got into the nitty gritty, and I agree with what Mercy's pointing out here, is to remember this is about a kingdom, this kingdom language and people forming. So when we're looking at this, the very first thing that it tells us, so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, when God came upon the scene to do it, why does God create the heaven and the earth? Because the earth was destroyed and left in waste. And why? Because the flood waters, which represent war and chaos. There was chaos and war in the land, destruction. There was no inhabitants. There was death. There was death and destruction. And we see God do what? Comes in and causes a wind to blow that causes the water to move off to one side and dry land to appear, and we see the building blocks to start to emerge. The grass starts coming, the trees start coming. So there's a restitution in the land taking place. So the very first thing we see, though, is we come upon the scene and there's destruction through war and chaos. And that's the image. It's an image that they're drawing for us. Just like if we take that all the way back to Revelation, God coming on the clouds throughout the Old Testament. Now Jesus coming on the clouds through the New Testament, bringing clouds of deep darkness and the floods of the deep and the waters to destroy. And that's absolutely the rain, the thunderstorms. And that's what we're seeing in Genesis 1 is the aftermath of these floods and storms. And so this is destruction that's upon the land, chaos and disorder. So then we see darkness being the description. So God says, let there be light. Well, this should parallel to us very easily with Jesus, as Israel is apostate. They're living alone in the world without God, rejected because they were no longer following. They become slaves in their own land, living under the curse with the Roman occupation held over them, and they were destitute. And what did we see? Jesus come upon the scene. And who is Jesus? He's the Adam, who was the type of him who was to come, Jesus, and he was the light shining in darkness. And that's what we see in Genesis, a light coming out of that darkness, that war, that death, that chaos, a light being pulled out from among them. And then what? And this is where we're going to kind of dig in a little bit here. That's where we kind of talked last time. And people are saying that was neat. So, where does this story go? And where does Adam come in? Well, we're going to play a little bit in that language. We have the land, it's in chaos and disorder. Cities are torn and thrown, death throughout the land. Why? Because of war and destruction. Well, then what we get into day 6, and that's where we get into all this colorful language, which we're going to get into. But before we get into that, a lot of area we covered there. Was there anything you wanted to add in there, Mercy?
And heaven and earth is a concept that we've talked about many times before, but this heaven and earth is their totality of their cosmology, right? They felt like heaven was a solid dome, and then the earth, the land, as far as the eye could see, that was really their heaven and earth. That was their land. So in their concept and in their cosmology of Genesis, it's not talking about the whole world, but it's talking about the land of Mesopotamia, right? And we know that because it says it in Genesis chapter 10, 2, chapter verse 10,
Yeah,
right?
that's what we're going to establish here with where the language that describes Adam. And we're going to take a look now with that heaven and earth language, like Mercy's saying, well, what does it say about it? Right? Like that. We have to get this specific because I think we skip over it. Genesis 1:26. Now, we're all familiar with this. The one thing that we're going to point out is where it says, let us make man in our image. The word there, man, it's the exact same word as Adam. It's Adam. It's the way it is. It's defined both ways, used both ways in the Bible. So when we read this, we got to understand it's actually the word Adam.
And
So let
down here, and sometimes there are times when I like it when the translators, you always have a translation council that's creating the translation of whatever Bible translation you're reading, and they pick the members there for a specific reason. And I do like it when they sort of do us the generosity and the courtesy to translate some of these words in a way that we can better understand, right, as an English speaking audience. But there are times when I wish they would just leave the darn word alone. And this is times where when you see for us it says man, if they would just have kept that word Adam in there, I think that it reads better. I think it exposes who Adam is. I think the focus is there then upon this, like, group of people, and that we miss partly because of our English translation. It's just man everywhere you go from the whole book. It's like man, 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 and then you'll have a pop-up of, oh, Adam here, Adam. But all of those other man words were Adam too. So I think we miss that in the English translation.
And it's tricky. And, as you were pointing that out, that's one of those things that I would recommend as anyone reading the Bible in general. Every time you come across the word man, throw Adam in and just see how that would impact the way you look at that. And we're going to take a look in conversations at his genealogy at some point as well, because we're going to find out that they were, as a group, corporately called man as well. So that's going to become a conversation. So we can see how these things all become intertwined. So that was a really good point that we got to keep that in mind as we're reading this. And I agree, specifically in this one. Here we're talking about the creation of Adam. This isn't the creation of man. This is the creation of Adam. And that really changes the context if we are reading this as let us make humans versus let us make Adam. So it's very different. So we're going to read it in the context in which the word was written, which is the word Adam. So let us make, and we're going to take a look at this word make too and see the context it's in, because hopefully we're 15 minutes in here. By the time we're done this, we will have defined what is Adam, where's the context of Adam from the start of the Bible to the end of the Bible. And this should be a nice thin layer. And this is where we're going to get going. So hopefully we've set up the context here, and let's kind of get into this. So let us make Adam, and let them, interestingly, let them. So we know this is plural. We know that when we're taking a look at this is corporately, which interestingly, if we compare this to Genesis 5, where this duplicates, it says, when Adam was created, male and female, he was created, and he named them Adam. So there, they both, male and female, are corporately were also called singularly Adam. So when we take a look here, this is right after let us make Adam male and female. And what does he say? Let us make Adam and let them have dominion. So here, this is a group of people. This is corporate. Let Adam corporately be a kingdom, dominion over the fish of the sea, over the heavens, over all the earth, and over everything that is on the earth. Well, that's actually quite a big deal when you think about it that way. We
Mm-hmm.
have a group. Even if this is singular, if we leave it in the singular tense, let us make Adam and give Adam dominion over everything that's on the earth. And dominion, I'll quickly define this for people who may have never heard this before. Dominion is the right of power to govern and control, having sovereign authority, rule, control, domination of a territory, usually of considerable size, in which a single rulership holds sway. Lands or dominions or domains are subject to sovereignty or control, which is an area of territory owned or controlled by a ruler or government. So that's what Adam was given. He was given a rule, he was given a domain, he was given a kingdom to rule over, is what it says. It says, let us make man over all the earth. So that's some very specific language that I'm stressing here. Before we move on, was there anything that jumped out that you wanted to comment on there, Mercy?
Well, I think Genesis 1:26 all the way to Genesis 1:28.
Yeah.
Call this the infamous dominion mandate. We even have the word dominion mandate now. How Christianity has interpret that as, totally not what the Bible is saying. I want to really emphasize that, because in Christendom we have used literally Genesis 1:26 and Genesis 1:28 to actually justify colonization, to justify crusades, to justify, manifest destiny. Anytime that, Christian empires or kingdoms would go out, they would use this verse to say, look, God has given us the territory, the domain over these people, and we can just go and do whatever we want. And that is not the context of Genesis here, as we've mentioned. This is in the context within the land of Mesopotamia, specifically to these groups of people and what God was doing with them at that time.
And that's where we're going to establish a little bit of word usage so that we can establish that, because it's very important to the context of what's happening to Adam in Genesis. If we just say Adam is the head over the land of Mesopotamia, we're still just reading that into it. So let's give some examples here so that we can uh, get through some of this language barrier, because I know that what I'm saying sounds familiar, but it's used in ways that don't sound familiar. So what we're going to do is try and slow this down a bit here. We're going to take a look at the word Rosh, the Hebrew word Rosh. It's in the Strong's Concordance. It's 7218, the Hebrew. Now, what Rosh is it's the head, the chief, the top, the beginning, or the leader. Often it is transcribed as primarily the head and the chief and the leader. So now, head, I'm going to just read this is what Strong's throws on here for us, which is the Hebrew word Rosh. Metaphorically is used to signify the chief or the leader of a group. The cultural and historical background, they write, in the ancient Near Eastern cultures, the concept of the head, the Rosh, was often associated with leadership and authority. In Israelite society, the head of a tribe of a family held significant authority and responsibility. Now, the reason why we're pointing this out is we got to get used to this idea of authority being a head. Why? Because a head is put over a body. What is a body? A body is a group of people who are stuck together who have one identity. So take your favorite sports team. All the players individually are nothing, but when they put on their uniforms, they get together, they make one team with many members. When you're a government over, I live in Canada, so you take all of our citizens individually, we're nothing, but once you put them together, we're a country, we're one body. And just like a hockey team or a football team or a basketball team, they all come together one team, they have a head over them, a coach. Well, just like political system, you have all the citizens together, we have a prime minister or a president or some kind of king. That's the head. But it might not be an individual, it might be a committee. So it might be a group of people, a senate over top of a group of people. So this is very important. Why? Because the head has authority, as we were just reading behind the meaning of the word Rosh. So whoever the head is has authority. That's very important. And heads sit above the body, and that's where we're going to hear some of this language. So, for example, we're going to hear the word Rosh used in Exodus 6:14. These are the heads of their fathers' houses, the sons of Reuben, the son firstborn of Israel. These are the heads of the fathers' houses. These are the leaders. Later in that chapter, Exodus 6:25, speaking about Eleazar, he goes, "These are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites by their clans." So here we have the Rosh, the heads. Those are the leaders, authority, rulers. They're the ones who choose the direction for the group, the body to follow. Now, this next example, I want to start pointing out some very interesting other language that surrounds headship. Deuteronomy 1:13 through 15, we have an interesting situation for Moses who says, choose for your tribes wise, understanding, and experienced men, and I will appoint them as your heads. So they're being appointed, they were being made, they were being given authority to be the heads. In verse 15, it says, "So I took the heads of your tribes, wise and experienced men, and set them as heads over you." Okay, so these heads who had ruling authority and direction, rights to choose the future for this whole body under them, were set over them as the head. Does that make sense so far? Is that
Yeah, yeah. If I can comment a little bit here on, you can pronounce it Rosh or Rosh. We have Rosh Hashanah, the very first new year
yeah,
in the
yeah.
fall, right? But the Hebrew calendar is always double, and there are 7 months in the spring and 7 months in the fall. So Rosh Hashanah is the fall feast, okay? But in the spring, you also have this Rosh or this Rosh, which was the barley feast. And any of the harvest that came out first, which was always barley, then wheat, and then grapes later. But in this concept of Rosh or the head, when we talk about in the spring time, it was during the Passover, and the harvest was barley. And when the first or the Rosh head of the barley would come, the first fruit, that would then lead the whole calendar system of 7 months to begin to start. And you started with that barley head, which is very interesting because barley, the BAR, it actually is like the root word rosh, of bara, of create. So I think that's really interesting how it all connects. But that rosh, that primary, the first fruit, is very important to understand of this headship concept.
Absolutely, and this is tied directly to the law system as well, because the entire legal system becomes this tracking with the seasonal succession of the first fruits, and then of the harvest, and then of the winter seasons, and the melt, and then the spring. So it's absolutely right in there. And so the head, the most important, is the Rosh Hashanah, the first of the year. And that's what we're seeing here. And that's continuing forward in Exodus. We're going to keep going into Exodus examples with this Rosh, Exodus 18:25. Speaking of when Moses did in Deuteronomy take these heads. Now, again, we're going to labor on this. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people. So just as the stalk of grain would climb up and the head would form at the top with the body of the plant underneath, we're seeing that the primary image is again of a body. We have Moses making, and it says, so we want to hear this. He set them as heads over. Exodus 18:25 said, Moses made them heads over the people. That's interesting because in Deuteronomy 28, verse 13, when God says to Israel, if you follow these commandments that I set before you today, if you are faithful and obedient to do these things, he says in Deuteronomy 28:13, the Lord will make you the head, and you only will be above. You will not be underneath if you listen to the commandments. So the covenant agreement with God and Israel made them the head. God said, I will make you. So there's an appointment, there's a making, a person who's already alive, who's being exalted into a higher standing, authority, and rule. We also see this not just being used of Israel. This is just the way they talk. In Daniel 2, verses 36 through 38, we understand that Nebuchadnezzar was given the kingdom rule after being used by God to come in and bring the curse upon Israel and Judah, Syria coming in earlier, taking away Sumer, the northern tribes of Israel, and Babylon coming in and sweeping away the rest of Judah. And what does the description given to that king when his time of ruling was? Well, in Daniel 2, verses 36 through 38, we read, this was the dream, and we'll tell of the interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom God of heaven has given the kingdom. Well, there's that dominion again. He was given the kingdom, the right to rule. And what is it described as in verse 38? The children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of heaven, making you, there's that make again, making you rule over them. You are the head of gold. And there we go again. It's the exact same phrase. That's just how they speak. I'm making you rule over them. You are the head. Why is that important? Because back to Genesis 1:26, what does it say? Let us make Adam and give him dominion over everything that is on the earth.
Mhm.
So, what was going on in Genesis 1? The earth was unformed and void. There was destruction. There was chaos. There was death in the land. What land? And then God came along, and because of the great love he had for this land and the people suffering under all this chaos and war, he sent to them a leader, a light, someone who would rise above them all. And he gave them dominion. He gave them the right to rule over everyone, to return order to the land. So God saw the land in chaos and rose one of those people up and gave them an empire to rule over the whole land, to return it to peace, so that there could be fruitful life again and not desolation and destruction, death, and chaos. Now, that does bring up that question. Well, if this is over the land, over the whole earth, where is that land and where is that earth? But before we move on to that, Mercy, that's we're basically summarizing chapter 1 at the moment. Is there anything else that we want to say before we zone in on Genesis 2, where we're going to take a really good look at the description of this location?
Couple of things I had in mind, and it's just giving more background information on the worldview of the Bible, the Near Eastern people, and even today of the Far East. And that is when we talk about identity for a family, an identity for a company, identity, it's always collective. Don't have this in the Western world. We're very, very individualistic. And it's about democracy and what my freedoms. But in the text of the Bible, the whole worldview was a collective sense of identity. And I think we really miss that when we read the Bible, we inject our worldview over it. And so we completely don't even see like the head and the tail and what are they really talking about? It's not very important to us, but it is very important because I think this theme needs to be elevated a little bit higher. You use the word corporate, right? I'm just saying another word that maybe could jog something in somebody in one of the audiences is this word of collective identity. This is very, very important. And
If
then
you want to, you could splice that collective as you said it, and think of the Borg. The Borg is one giant collective made up of many individuals, but they functioned as one unit. And
yeah,
that's a really good parallel because that's collective, same idea. Sorry, I just you said that. I was like, oh, awesome.
no, corporate collective, this collective identity as a people, right? And what God is doing with them, that's very, very significant. And then secondly, just going back to the Hebrew feasts, there were 7 feasts. And when you read through the Bible and thread through this first fruit concept, the first fruits, which is the head, the rosh, it was always a sign that the rest would come in, right? So it's almost like wherever the head went, if the head went towards the good, they were, then the whole body was going to be good. If the head was bad, then the whole body was going to be bad. So it's funny how it is collective, but who's leading that collective or that corporate body? It's the headship, and it's supposed to, if the head goes this way, the whole body follows that. And we lose that concept because we're thinking, oh, we're reading just about Jacob, we're just reading about Abraham. But no, their worldview is very collective and very corporate in mind. And this also will, you're going to tie into like why that's so significant.
Yeah, we need to understand that because we're talking nationally anyway. Like the whole Bible's about Israel. It's very rarely about the individual. The individual is typically an image to reflect the national concerns. Like the entire book of Hosea, Hosea is told, you're going to represent Israel. Now go and marry a prostitute, and you're going to lay on your side for this many. That's going to represent this many days, so Israel can see what's going on, what they're doing. And so we've got to understand that that idea is more normal actually to them than our idea. So I think that's a very good point that you bring up. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
um nope, those two things for right now.
Perfect, right on. There's so many things we could get into, right? All right, so we're going to now focus into where was this? So we have Moses who's living. We know where Moses is. He's in Egypt. Where is Egypt? Well, that's northern eastern. Depends on which map you're looking at, but the northeastern part of Africa, connecting into the southern basin of the Middle East, where we find a description given to us of Adam, and that's in Genesis 2. So we have war, chaos in the land of where that Adam is supposed to rule over, and as it says in Genesis, subdue. In Genesis 1, it's to have subdue and have dominion. So you have to wrangle them in. This wasn't just, hi, everybody, follow me, some kind of weird magic things happening. No, this is a guy came in and he had to conquer and set up dominion and force peace in the land. And what's neat about that is in Genesis 2, verse 9, we start up. This is right after Adam's being formed, and the Lord God now making all the trees to spring up, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The covenant is made. They're now walking in agreement. They can walk in life or they can walk in evil and death. And in verse 10, we get a very interesting description now that we have this covenant people in the land ruling over the land. And what does it say? A river flowed out of Eden. This is where these people were put. This is where Adam was put to rule over the land. And it says, a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden. And there it divided and became four. We're going to skip down to verse 14 because it says, interestingly, and the name of the third river is the Tigris, which flows out of Assyria, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. So a river flowed out of Eden and becomes the Euphrates and the Assyria. Well, this is Mesopotamia. So when we look at the Tigris and we look at the Euphrates, they're two rivers that sit side by side. They're massive. We don't say rivers, they're massive water transportation, you know, rivers, they're huge, and there's a land between them. The word Mesopotamia means the land between the two rivers. Which two rivers? The Tigris and the Euphrates. It's still that way today. It was that way when they wrote it. Where was Adam's kingdom? Flowing into the Euphrates. So where's the Euphrates and the Tigris? Mesopotamia. So if we read that context, and before, wait, I don't think I'm reading that very hard. Like, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Do you think that that makes sense? Like, it has to be Mesopotamia? Like, I know this is foreign to a lot of people, so maybe we shouldn't just fly past hearing that.
Um, Well, you remember how in the previous videos I was sharing with you, like in the beginning, as I was reading Genesis, as a little kid, Genesis was my favorite book. And I would read it and I'm reading it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is at a certain area. This is what's the setting? Because, I learned in elementary school, what's the setting, where, why, the what, the who. So I'm looking at the setting and I remember reading chapter 2 and I'm like, oh, this is at this region of Mesopotamia. I found that to be very fascinating because my church never taught me that. In fact, they said we don't know where Eden is. In fact, my church taught us that it was some magical place in some other dimension portal. So I'm just reading, I'm like, well, it says it right here, right? The river of the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Gihon, and the Pishon, and that is an ancient way of saying what that region was. And we know that that region had changed throughout, the thousands of years. But also at the same time, I'm reading Genesis thinking, oh, Adam wrote Genesis. That's what I'm thinking as a little kid, right? Oh, it has to be Adam because it's Adam and Eve. So he's writing about this. I don't know why I didn't think it was Noah or somebody else, but I just thought, oh, Adam wrote this. Well, since we know that it's Moses and the collective body of, editors that came, the scribes, whatever, associated with that, with the authorship, we know that, yeah, it was written way later because this is how you can go into textual criticism is that in Genesis 2, what we read in verse 14, where it says east of Assyria, Assyria did not exist at this time. So the people that are writing about this description, they're writing it way after the fact. and they have oral culture, however they got this information, and now they're injecting their contemporary concept and the landmass and putting it into the text. This is
So what that means, so what that means is that when Moses chose that, if you're what you're saying is correct, Moses is going out of his way to say, you see Mesopotamia? That's where Adam used to be. Is that what you're suggesting?
yes, and that the word Assyria wasn't even prior to Moses. So
Exactly.
get in there, he's actually locating it there, and you could see right there, this is a literal place in time in this region, in this area, and everyone knew that at that time. It was a no-brainer. We just don't know it because we're so far removed from it, and I just wanted to make that point.
That's a good point because we got to understand that Moses, being credited with this, went out of his way then to identify this specific land mass. We also see later Abraham comes out of Ur, which is part of this exact same land mass. We also see they're given the Canaan, which is exactly part of this land mass's evolution during that time period. It's
There's
all within.
and there's over 25 verses that actually talk about Mesopotamia. Uh,
The biggest that we got to get past too is Noah's children. They filled the whole earth of Shinar. But it's weird how the Bible authors pick and choose these words. Why is it here the Tigris and the Euphrates, and with when we get to Noah, we get Shinar? Because they're talking about a place that they understood and they referenced. Who is Shinar? Mesopotamia. So it's very interesting because now they're actually they're literally saying it directly straightforward. In fact, the Tower of Babel, which that area, which with the whole area, the whole earth was filled, that word Babel, everywhere else in the entire Bible that it's translated is translated Babylon. So they were in Babylon, which is in Mesopotamia, where all of Noah filled the whole earth, and the 70 tribes filled all of Shinar, which is Mesopotamia, where Adam had his kingdom, where Israel had its kingdom. There was no other place labeled in the entire Bible than this area of Mesopotamia. And so that's very important. Why? Because when we're asserting in Genesis 1 that God made a covenant with the people of Adam to rule over the land, Adam was being put over the land of Mesopotamia. He was the king and the head over the body of people of Mesopotamia. And what do you call that body? Well, when we take a look at biblical example in Isaiah 43, I do believe it's Isaiah 43, 1, 2, and 3. Mercy will tell me if I'm wrong. It says, Jacob I created, Israel I formed. I have called you by name. You are mine. That's very, very important. Why? Because that's exactly the same things that were used to describe Adam. Adam was created, Adam was formed, and in Genesis 5:1, when he was created and formed, he was given a new name. So here we have the exact same creation pattern, and we also have the same corporate structure. We have Jacob, who was renamed Israel, and he was the head over the 12 sons called Israel. So we have the head, Israel or Jacob, over the body of the 12 sons who become the nation of Israel. So one body, Israel, with a head, Jacob, and 12 sons who become the 12 nations which make up its members. So just like a hockey team has members that are nothing, but when they come together, they're united and make a team with a head, captain, coach. Canadians all come together, they make Canada with a prime minister. Israel has 12 nations, and when they come together, they make the 12 tribes of Israel with the head Jacob. It's the same exact language. And what do we have? We have Adam, the whole body of Mesopotamia with the head of Adam over top of it. So, what is Adam only? Adam only is a covenant God made when he saw that the people of Mesopotamia were suffering from war and destruction and chaos and death. So he sent a people to rule over them, to restore order to the land, and gave them sovereign rulership, and made a covenant with them that they and their descendants would remain in that position to bring peace and harmony throughout the land for all time. Adam only is God's covenant concerning the people of Mesopotamia and the leader he installed over them. From the first Adam to the last Adam, to the last, so from the first head over Mesopotamia to the last head over Mesopotamia, the covenant of Adam only. God with Mesopotamia to maintain peace and order in the land of Mesopotamia through the headship of Adam and his descendants. It started in Eden and ended in Jerusalem. And that was the whole covenant from start to finish. It didn't include any other group of people. It was Mesopotamia and Mesopotamia only. We see that boundary established when Israel is brought out of Egypt, and God said, "That's the ends of the earth. I found you at its remotest place at the ends of the earth." Jonah fled to Joppa to get outside of the jurisdiction of God, outside of the Mesopotamian boundaries and borders. Israel inherited, that's Moses' claim. Israel inherited Adam's covenant, replacing Adam in the land because there was no ruler. Israel was becoming the new ruler. They were becoming the new Adam in the land who was going to restore order and peace. How? Because God made them the head. Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 28. I will make you the head, and you only will be above if you follow the commandments.
Mhm.
This is what Moses is selling to Israel. He is saying, Eden was a time of chaos and disorder. So God created a covenant man who came and established a covenant kingdom, who became the ruler over the whole land of Mesopotamia and restored peace and order. But he fell. And then that job of ruling and order, that passed to Noah and his children. But that didn't establish. So that passed to Abraham, and a promise to Abraham and to his children was God would reestablish it with them. And Moses is saying, we are those people that God promised Abraham he would establish, and now we are the new power in the land. However, we also know they didn't establish it and they didn't keep it up. They kept sinning and falling to the point where God brought upon the scene Jesus, the final inheritor of the kingdom. The kingdom was taken away from Israel and given to Jesus, who succeeded in the mandate, who lived up to the covenant agreement, who fulfilled all of the desires of that system. And the contract agreement, which began with Adam and Eden, concluded by the works of Jesus. The whole contract, start and finish, the land was finally delivered over in order, and it became the end of the covenant. So that's what Adam only is referring to, is Eden to Jerusalem, and one covenant concerning the whole land of Mesopotamia and the times under that covenant, where Adam and his descendants were supposed to rule over them and bring peace and order. So hopefully, like, I'm gonna ask you now, Mercy, did that come through clear? Because I know this is weird to hear. So if I miss something, pick me up there. We got about 10 minutes, so feel free.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think if we see the whole framework of the Bible in a holistic way from the beginning to the end, then we recognize what we're dealing with. And then we can start the conversation from there. I think that with Christendom and Christianity and how, evangelical Christianity has taken this, we've asked a whole bunch of questions that's really irrelevant. If you're not understanding the proper framework of the Bible, of the audience relevance, the cultural relevance, the language relevance, the historical relevance. So if it is from this category of people, we should be asking different types of questions, right? way different kinds of questions. And talking about Mesopotamia and the land, why is this so important? Because if you're talking about ruling over and you're giving that inheritance from the father to the son, you're now recognizing, gosh, if you don't have any land, there is no inheritance. If you don't have any inheritance, then you don't have a name and a people. Then you don't have any right to rule and reign. This is what people need to grasp and understand. And so now going
You
back,
would be you would be considered unformed.
mm,
Very
good.
good. No, I'm just saying what you're saying there. Like, take everything Mercy was saying there because as a perfect description of a unformed peoples.
Mhm. And in that mindset, you're talking about, well, I don't want to go into the seas and the exile people, why they're not in heaven and earth. This heaven and earth concept is, if the Rosh, the head, was ruling in that land, they all knew in their cosmology the only way you can have dominion is if God was with you and God gave you that authority because God was the ultimate. So then you're talking about the sun, moon, and stars, which are in the heaven. So you were in heavenly places, ruling the land down below where the members are. So this is where the heaven and earth concept is. And then we can later on talk about the sea and where those people fit in. But this is the heaven and earth connected to this region, this portion of the world. And now we have an insight to what is God doing with this people group and what can we learn about his nature and his character. This is what we're opening up when we go into the book of Genesis.
And before you move on from that point, to reinforce how that goes all the way to Jesus, we get that again in Ephesians, and many times Paul talks about how you died with Christ, and you were raised into heavenly places.
Right.
It's that concept of authority, the right to rule. And I was just going to throw this up on there. As it started, we had Adam was given dominion. We had in Psalms 114 when Israel went out from Egypt. Judah became a sanctuary and Israel his dominion. Well, and what was Jesus described as in Revelation 1 5 through 6? Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, the ruler of the kings on earth, who has made us to be a kingdom of priests to his God and Father. To him be dominion forever. We started with a head getting dominion over the whole earth. We end with a man, a king, a light, a whatever motif we want to throw on there. We're met with the Son of God again, who's given rulership over the whole earth with dominion. It ends with dominion, it passes to Israel for dominion, and it ends in dominion. If we can't see that this is talking about someone ruling the land, we've missed the entire narrative of the Bible. As much as we don't want to think about it, the Bible is a book of conquest. Then it's a book of maintaining that conquest after you've subdued everybody. This is what they lived in during those times. Because if a good leader was able to rule the land, then the land would be benefiting. If they couldn't, then the land would be suffering. So I'm sorry, you just made such a good point. I had to hammer that because it was like, that's why they were in the heavens, because they were ruling with the wisdom of God. They were
Right.
ruling with God in their presence, in their temple. Sorry,
Mhm.
got
And
me ranting.
what makes Israel different is that, all the other city states and the empires of that region, they said they were the suzerain. And they wanted the vassal, smaller city states, and they wanted obedience from them so that they could have peace, shalom in the land, right? What was different with Israel was that God was the suzerain, God was the King of Kings, and this was the structure and the format that they were living in. So God comes out, he joins them in their world to say, okay, you guys have this structure system, but I want to show you how to do it. And here we have this interplay of them using what the land of Mesopotamia, how the suzerains thought they were gods, and here is Israel saying, yeah, we have a suzerain, but here is God, the actual God, the invisible God. And this is why when we do comparative studies and all the other cuneiform tablets and their, beginning Genesis story accounts, we can do this comparison and see how unique the Bible is, how different the Bible is, but yet similar in the fact that they're all related and they're all from the same landmass. That's why we know that it's historical. That's why we shouldn't get offended that there's these other stories that are so similar and that Israel copied from them or anything. No, they're all talking about a same worldview, a cultural framework, but we're recognizing, oh my gosh, here is God, and He's pulling them out literally of this darkness and how they're ruling and reigning. And what were they doing? They were kingdom forming. So when Jesus comes in the New Testament, He's talking about the kingdom, the kingdom, the kingdom, the kingdom. I mean, you said conquest, you're talking about subduing, but it's really about kingdom building. That's why Jesus was always talking about the kingdom, the kingdom. And I don't mean to offend anyone, but right now, we're not in the age of the kingdom. We don't want to be in the age of the kingdom, because when you talk about kingdom, you're talking about a physical conquest, land, someone ruling over you, all of that. We don't want to be under that. Jesus actually came to set us free from that kind of mindset. At that time frame, they couldn't even go there and think outside of that. But Jesus, that's why Jesus used their language and said, hey, the kingdom of God is near, it is at hand, because that's what they were trying to build. And He did build it, and He fulfilled it.
Well, that's a big deal too, because this being about dominion, what was Jesus's claim? I came to take dominion. He even claims in Matthew, I have received the all authority of heaven and earth. Which,
Yes.
interestingly, I want to point out this scripture in Psalm 8, just to kind of go to that language of the heavens. It's very interesting how it says in starting in verse 3, when I look at your heavens and the work of your fingers. Well, we know that the work of your hands is mostly tied to Israel throughout the whole Bible, His covenant people. For God works, He creates, and He says, I formed you, O Israel, from the dust. You are the clay, I am the potter, and you are the works of my hands. Well, here he goes. I look at your heavens, the works of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. There we have that being put over, which is interesting because when we read in Genesis 1, day 4, we have that ordering. And what was the ordering? The sun and moon were to rule over the earth. So we have the sun, the moon, and what does it say? What is man that you're mindful of him? Well, that's a very interesting connection. I look at your heavens, I look at the works of your hands, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and I say, well, what is man? What is Adam that you are mindful of him? The son of Adam that you should care for him. So, what is this man that you are mindful of? Or even the son of Adam that you would care for him? Verse 5, you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings. You have crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, just as it was promised to Israel. You will be above, you will not be under.
Mhm.
Why? Because they were raised into heavenly places and given the ruling right over the land, the dominion of God. So what is Adam only? Adam only as God so much loved the land of Mesopotamia, and He saw them struggling through the growth of civilization that was bringing in chaos, war, destruction, death, and chaos in the land. The people were suffering underneath this transitional period of time. And because of God's great love for them, He said to Mesopotamia, I'm going to raise up amongst you a ruler, and that ruler is going to bring peace and order back into the land. And I make my covenant with him, and I reveal my truth to him, and he will lead you into fruitful years all the days of his life. And that covenant was made to save and restore the land of Israel. That covenant people passed that covenant through one line of genealogy all the way to the point of Jesus, where eventually that people, that ruler over the land of Mesopotamia, his line came to an end, and the contract between God and his need to care through that contract over the people of Mesopotamia came to an end. It served its purpose, it fulfilled its mandate, it completed its task. God moved on, the world moved on, and we're now in a better place because of it. And it's up to us to read and understand that message so that we can join in that better place with them. So, what is Adam only? It's not talking about one guy. It's not talking about the. It's talking about the covenant God made with Mesopotamia because He loved them, and but that time came to an end, and the Adam only is concerning just that time period. I hope that's clear. I think that's clear, right, Mercy? Like,
Totally. And like you were saying, right before we were videotaping, why did it come to an end? I think people get offended at this new covenant or the covenant system ending. Why did it come to an end? Because, like you said, Dallas, in our talk, because it succeeded, because Jesus fulfilled it. That's why. That's a good news story. That's not bad news, folks. Let's put it in perspective.
you know, we've got to realize that it was successful.
Mm.
The
Jesus.
spiritual heaven and earth, however you want to say it, however you want to picture it, whatever you want to say, God fulfilled all things within that agreement system within Jesus. And because it was successful, it finally came to an end.
Mm.
It didn't come to an end because they were bad, because they were rejected and cast off. It came to an end because order was restored to the land. The righteous Son of God appeared, and he did his task for an entire generation, the world of Mesopotamia, under the rule of the Son of Man, fulfilling the righteous kingdom of God and bringing and restoring blessing and peace to all the peoples of the land, was fulfilled in that covenant. And that was it. That was the end of the story. It's not a bad thing. Movies come to an end, even if we love them. Books come to an end, even if we love them. Contracts come to an end, even if we love them. And Adam came to an end, even though we loved him. And so it's one of those things where that's what Adam only is. But now, what does that mean to us? Everything that God did with those people is now a testimony to who God is
Mm.
and how he perceives man, how he moves towards man. So the Bible and this testimony that he put into Adam becomes his testimony and message to all humans everywhere about who he is and what his desire for us. And what is that? That any man, anywhere, at any time, it can come before him simply based upon God's good character to accept him. Why? Because God is faithful and true and you can trust him. Why? Go read the Bible. All right, so there's my pitch. Adam only. Hopefully that clears it up. Mercy, anything that you would want? Because I know you too. You're out there. You're talking to lots of people. If there's one more thing, I know we're going to get into more depth. There's so many more layers of Adam only. But concerning this layer, is there something you'd like to throw out there? I know a lot of people want to hear what you have to say as well.
Well, I had it in my head and now it's sort of slipping. Um, but in this concept of like this new covenant and the old covenant and this testimony of the Bible, I want to say, well, why are we even studying this if all this was all about Adam? This is Adam only, and then Israel only. Well, why are we studying it if it was only about Israel? What you don't understand is the bigger picture. And if you know anything about me, I'm a very big picture person. And that is when I look at the Bible, why it's there and why it's so important is so that we don't have to repeat it. If you study human history, it repeats over and over. I'm telling you, we don't need to go through what they did to learn what they learned. So we can read, it's very easy now. We can read this and be like, oh, we don't need to go through all of that to get to God. That's the freedom that we have now. That's the message. And hopefully in other videos, we can talk about that and really flesh that out. We have testimony and evidence that we never have to go through all of this stuff, religion, 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 to get to God. We can go to God through that just a mere relationship. And so that's why it's important, because we don't ever want to repeat that ever again. We don't need to.
It's a good picture. God positions in front of us. We can come to him directly and rely on his character to accept us, or we can choose to try to produce things out of ourselves that we will rely on that make will we will think will make us acceptable to God. Maybe if I tithe, maybe if I worship, maybe if I read more, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do that, maybe if I don't do this, maybe if I don't do that. I'm creating for me an image to present to God to say, now am I acceptable? So it's up to you. You can try to become acceptable and present that and hope God will buy into it, or you can just trust God's character to accept you because he's good. So that's the message, and it's not complex, it's not complicated, but we sure make it that way. So go ask your parents. You've all been raised by the same people who looked down at you one day and said, my God, these children make things so complicated. I just love them. That's what we do with God. He just loves you. And now I know that's a little bit silly and a little bit at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, it really is that. And you can trust it, and you can walk in it, and you can see whatever that does for you. Well, you don't have to. It's up to you. I'm not saying one way or the other what's going to happen, but that's the message of the Bible. So you can trust it and try Him. I'm not asking you to believe in magical talking snakes. I'm not asking you to believe in anything. We just try and understand what the Bible says. And so that's what Adam only is. I'm not trying to create all these things. Picture of a group of people that God told us that we can be reassured in. And this is what I get asked the most. Then what's the message of the Bible? Why is Jesus important? Because now we know that God is trustworthy and faithful. And now we know why we can trust him. So I think on the end of that, we're good, Mercy. Do you have anything else?
Nope, that's it. For freedom and in Christ, that's why he came, was to set us free.
Fantastic. I want to thank you all for making it through here. I thought we were going to be way longer, but we're only an hour and 6 minutes. So that's pretty darn good. That's fantastic. Thank you for making it to the end. We're going to continue these conversations. We're going to move forward. We might either hit New Covenant, or we're going to take a look at the first 8 chapters and try and look at. We've got a couple ideas. And next time we get together, hopefully you find those just as interesting. So wherever you are, I hope this finds you well, and God bless.